beautiful daughter you have. Can't wait to hear her sing.
We came into the project with the intention of challenging genre conventions. As we actually wanted to film an actual short film for this project, we had to choose genres which were doable given the physical and financial limitations that we faced in bringing this piece to life. We decided on the genres musical and action and came up with two main hypotheses that we wanted to prove. For the former, we wanted to prove that integrated musicals did not necessarily require a suspension of disbelief. For the latter, we wanted to prove three things, namely that fight sequences could be realistic yet legible, action sequences could propel the narrative forward, and lastly, the action sequence could be conceived without overwhelming non-diegetic background music. We feel that challenging these genre conventions would not only be interesting, but it will also be very fruitful and pertinent as it offers an alternative perspective on how these traditional conventions within their genres can further evolve with the times. Unlike musical classics like Singing in the Rain and Oklahoma that have staged and unrealistic musical and dance sequences, we are hoping that our film can deliver a musical experience while still very much in touch with reality. Furthermore, we wanted to challenge the common conventions of Hollywood action films, like in The Avengers Endgame, where upon the arrival of the heroes, the Avengers, we immediately hear Hans Zimmer's genius but non-diegetic musical score in the background. Or in The Matrix, where fight sequences are legible but unrealistic and do not directly propel the narrative forward. We feel that we have been able to combat these traditional conventions and created an action musical film that is legible, realistic, and able to propel the narrative through its action-packed sequences. Alright, enough of my blabbering. Let's sit back and enjoy the film.
What a beautiful daughter you have. Can't wait to hear her sing.
And now, from Primary 1C, we have Raksha.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you Actually, I want to sing another song. It's for someone special. He's not here. Again. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to Daddy. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
beautiful daughter you have. Can't wait to hear her sing.
Alright, so let's start with the narrative and how it reflects the objectives. Our film is a story of a man who loses his daughter because of his alcoholism. The night he was supposed to show up for his 7-year-old's performance at her primary school concert, he actually went to drink. So a gang with a vendetta against him showed up for the recital instead and shot his daughter dead. Before his daughter was shot, the head of the gang made a threatening phone call to him, but because he was drunk, he could not make it in time to save her. The loss of his daughter left him with an inability to move on from hallucinations of that night, the night that he failed to protect his daughter because of his alcoholism. So essentially, the story journeys how he relives the night trapped within his hallucination, forced to confront his inner demon, alcoholism.
The narrative was meant to test two main objectives. The first is to test if integrated musicals can be done without a suspension of disbelief. We used elements of backstage musicals to achieve this. When the protagonist is fighting off the bad guys, all they see is him fighting them off to get to his daughter who is singing on stage. At this point, there is a realistic motivation behind the action sequence that is performed with the accompaniment of the song. Nobody challenges this spectacle. It is only in the last scene back at the bar that audience recognize the integrated musical. So that means up till this point, the spectacle was realistic. So our film managed to prove that if you include elements of backstage musicals, in this case, the recital, it justifies the performance in the narrative. This shows that it is possible to integrate the performance into the narrative while preventing a complete rupture of realism. The second thing we wanted to test was if action sequences can propel the narrative instead of halting it, all while remaining legible and without overwhelming non-diegetic music. To achieve this objective, our film tackles the centrality of action. The contention about action films is that action takes precedence, but in our film, the action sequence reveals an important part about the narrative, which actually helps audience understand the story better. It symbolizes the struggle the protagonist faces to combat his inner demons. So instead of interrupting our story, our fight sequences articulate the emotions of the protagonist. The pain, the agony, the frustration are all part of his battle against alcoholism. This actually helps the narrative progression. On top of this, we ensured legibility of the fight sequence through the use of slow motion. This way, the sensory and the emotional feel is conveyed with every hit and every fall. We also selected a song that was slow-moving, which complemented well with the slow motion to prevent it from seeming as though a lot was going on screen. This made the action sequence less overwhelming for the audience, and it actually helped us achieve the objective. Besides the narrative, the mise-en-scène was another aspect of film style that we played around with to help reflect our objectives. Lighting was useful in doing so. When the protagonist's daughter comes out, all the light on set focuses on her. Also note that the only lighting on set came from the stage and went off when she died. This was key in conveying that she is the center of the narrative. The film, as a whole, uses warm lighting to emphasize the love between the characters, while simultaneously bringing out the redness of the Featurette. We were quite particular when it came to the setting. There were only 2 sets used in the film, the bar and the Featurette. We chose the bar because we wanted a setting that best connected him with alcoholism.
An empty bar helped capture his isolation.
The second set, the Featurette, holds a high significance in the narrative because it was the place he lost his daughter. The Featurette is empty because he wasn't there that night, and so he couldn't really hallucinate anything else. He couldn't picture an MC, faces of audience members, ushers, nothing except his daughter and the sounds. We chose a Featurette with red seats and red carpeting because red is symbolic of violence, danger, and love. The red is contrasted by the dark blue curtains in the auditorium that represent sadness. On set, the whiskey bottle is an important prop, not just to indicate his alcoholism, but the different bottles of liquor in the first and second bar scene were meant to indicate the progression in time by marking the next day.
I'll be taking us through the decisions behind the costumes of the characters as well as their figure behaviors. So with costumes, first let's talk about the costume of the daughter Raksha. Her costume, we decided, had to make it abundantly clear that she was a young child performing in her capacity as a student. At the same time, the costume had to invoke a sense of pity for her suffering, both from her father's large absence in her life as well as her eventual death. To that end, we decided that a school uniform would be apt. As for the colour of the uniform, we decided that it should have some element of white to show her pure and innocent soul, with her being a child and all, and hence she wears a white shirt on the inside. We then decided that the pinafore should be blue, so as to, well, first complement the blueness of the curtains, and two, directly contrast the redness of the entire auditorium. This contrast is intended to be reflective of her being shielded from the redness and violence of her father's life, as well as being representative of her sadness. As for the father's outfits, they were envisioned with a similar concept in mind. The white was meant to signify a certain sense of dignity and purity that he does embody, evident through the pain and suffering he willingly endures in a bid to save his daughter. However, his white is worn in a more slipshod manner. You can see from his first costume, the shirt is crumpled, unbuttoned. The second costume, the t-shirt is crumpled as well. This messy and sloppy wearing of the white is directly contrasting to the prim and proper way his daughter wears the white colour in the uniform, emphasizing the difference in extents of their purity. To further drive across this point, we intended the white in the costumes to be tainted with elements of black, such that his innocence is stained by his violence and his meddling in the vices, especially alcoholism. Therefore, the father wears a white shirt with a black tie to show this contrast, and his entire lower body, from the pants to the boots, are all black. Fundamentally, the messy nature of his outfit was meant to holistically portray the idea that the father is washed up, alcoholic, sloppy, and not in control of himself. Now let's move on to the henchman or the assailant, right? So the idea of the assailant was to create an air of suspense and force the audience to think about who the assailant is and pay little attention to details, to arrive at the conclusion that the assailant was actually the father's inner demon. To do this, we had dressing the assailant in black had two benefits. First, recall back to when I said the father's costume was meant to be whiteness tainted with blackness. So the assailant is that blackness personified. He represents all the vices, the violence, and the darkness in the father. Second, it was imperative that the face of the assailant is not shown, hence the blackness of the costume helps mask the face of the assailant given the dim lighting of the film. To also drop more hints that the assailant was the father's inner demon itself, if you look closely, the assailant wears the same pants and same shoes as the father, and you can see this especially where the father grabs the assailant's leg. This also ties in with how the bottle the assailant uses is the same bottle that the father drinks from in the later bar scene. Let's now move on to figure behavior. With respect to Raksha, the daughter, she walks out nervous, slowly, her eyes dart around when she speaks. This is to represent her constant searching for her father in the audience and also metaphorically in her life. Her general sad demeanour and her tears also signify immense pain when she has been left neglected by her father time and time again. As for the father's figure behaviour, the way he stumbles in both the bar scenes indicate his drunken state and complete disorientation from the realities of life. Also, if you note, he always finishes his whiskey before rushing off to save his daughter, which shows his extreme alcoholism. Next, the way he brushes open the curtain in a sharp manner directly contrasts the way Raksha gently and slowly opens her curtains. This shows the aggression that is embedded in him, contrasted with the tame innocence in his daughter. Also, every time the father is hit, he does not acknowledge his assailant at all. His eyes are instead transfixed on the daughter, And this is to bring across the idea that he refuses to acknowledge the darkness in him and tries to focus on his daughter despite clearly suffering from alcoholism. However, at some point, when he starts to acknowledge and fight back, his back is turned to the daughter. This represents that he does indeed acknowledge the darkness within him, but when he does so, he loses sight of his daughter. Now, he does turn around and rush to his daughter eventually, but then it's too late and she dies. This particular behavior of the father during these action sequences begs the audience to ponder, what if the father hadn't turned around to confront his demons? Well, perhaps he could have saved his daughter, but we don't think so, because the idea that the father chooses not to confront his demons would lead us to the conclusion that the father would most likely be dead before he even reaches his daughter.
Cinematography was key in bringing this idea to life, keeping the film easily comprehensible while also holding deeper meaning to each frame that was shot. It meant bringing order to the complexity of the themes. The film starts with a shot that is extremely shaky and jumps in and out of focus, framed closely on the bottle of alcohol and the cup, serving as sort of a glimpse into the vision and normalcy of the alcoholic character. It conveys to the audience clearly the state of mind the character is in a simple and effective manner. This shot style is followed all the way through till the character gets off his chair and stumbles off frame to the next scene, out of his reality. The shakiness and focus jumps are starkly contrasted the moment the character sort of enters the performance theatre, a figment of his hallucination. From that point on, shots become a lot more stable and almost as if they are floating through the space. They are purposefully placed and focused to convey his movement in the mental space, like a trip down a memory lane. This is evidenced by particular shots that are used to kind of portray how small and isolated he is in the grandeur of the huge and empty theatre, even though he's hearing the sounds of the audience. This is primarily used at the start and the end of the whole action sequence in this setting. Apart from that, during the whole journey in this theatre setting, heavy emphasis is placed on close-ups for the two characters. For the daughter, it is used to capture the emotion up close as she performs the piece, and for her father, it is a painful way of showing how he struggles to just catch a glimpse of his daughter, whenever he could before he loses a chance to. There is a specific shot that tries to capture this motivation. When the protagonist is hit on the head with a liquor bottle, it cuts away to the shot whereby the daughter is placed in the background, against the foreground where the father is falling from the impact. This is used to communicate the previously mentioned theme of how the daughter remains his focus, regardless of what is happening around him. The camera never focuses on the demon's face. It was a motivated decision to signify that the protagonist really never acknowledges the demon. It was not his focus and he does not treat it seriously. It's almost as if he just moves along with it and does not even flinch about it. Until the turning point that comes in the character's arc, where he loses his cool and decides to fight back against it. At this point, there's a significant shot of the protagonist in the foreground punching the demon, with the daughter in the background in a small and demure frame. This shot is placed to strikingly contrast the violence and the innocence of the two characters, respectively, and how oblivious they are to each other's lives. The final shot in the theatre setting is covered mostly in darkness and uses silhouettes for the two characters. This is a natural ending point as all the previous shots gradually move towards a darker tone and with lesser lighting, signaling the darkness that was following him through the journey and eventually ends up catching up to his daughter and engulfing her in it as well. The shots in this film were carefully placed to convey the mental state of the protagonist while trying to preserve the emotional significance of both the characters. They move the audience quite literally through the eyes of the characters and the mind space of the protagonist. The editing went hand in hand with the cinematography to preserve the motivations of the shot. The closing and opening of the eyes are mimicked at the bar sequences to portray how the character is drunk to the point he's barely conscious. The shakiness and the focus jumps were preserved all the way till the first shot of the daughter, from which point onwards, almost all the shots are used in slow motion. This was also a key decision to go against the convention of illegibility in action sequences by making the whole motion slow and easy to understand, with simple action sequences that audiences can follow, yet holding the impact and weight to them.
Every time the protagonist is hit, we always feature a close-up shot of him looking at his daughter, signifying how he does not want to lose sight of her. And unfortunately, every time he does fix his gaze on his daughter, we move the action sequence forward by him getting hit again. The timing of the attacks on the protagonist are also timed carefully to the lyrics of the song the daughter is singing. For example, there were a couple of instances whereby whenever the daughter sings out using the word daddy to address him, the film cuts to a shot to feature him prominently and also what he is going through. Perhaps most unique about this film is how the color shift is used. The film starts with a black and white color palette, which ever so gradually shifts starting from the phone call to a warm and reddish tinge of lifelike colors as the film progresses to the end of the action sequence. This is used to portray the mundaneness of his reality and how he has almost lost all sense of livelihood. The color coming in shows that this is the moment that is ever etched in his mind as his view of reality. This is rather unconventional in the sense that black and white color is usually used to signify flashbacks and past events, but in this film, it's the opposite. This unconventional choice is also applied for the sound design of the film. Everything but his hallucination is portrayed as echoey and unclear. The phone call, the audience, the MC and his daughter are all clearer than the actual reality he is in with his liquor bottle and the whiskey cup.
What a beautiful daughter you have. Can't wait to hear her sing.
As explained before, this portrays that the protagonist has come to a mental stage whereby he believes that this is his reality. The song choice was also carefully considered to challenge the convention of loud and overpowering music in action films by using simple and single instrument music pieces that place the more emphasis on the emotions and the diegetic sounds. The Happy Birthday song is also significant in the sense that it conveys how he was always missing, even on the important and special occasions he could have spent with his daughter.
I want to sing another song. It's for someone special. He's not here. Again.
The usage of the same starting song, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, in the second bar scene in the ending of the film, where her coughing interrupts the whole film to an abrupt end, makes it clear that the protagonist is going through the whole cycle again.
The strength of our project lies in our film and how the film clearly portrays how we managed to achieve the objectives that we set out to explore. With regard to the action genre, we tackle the issues of action sequences not being able to propel the narrative forward, that action sequences are not legible, and that they tend to have overwhelming, non-diegetic music. First, the action sequence in our film propelled the narrative forward. The fact that the father was hit in the head by a whiskey bottle as opposed to a pole, and that he was beaten up by a black figure wearing black pants and black shoes like he was, prompts the audience to ponder and hopefully reach the conclusion that what is hitting him down is his alcoholism, which is his inner demon. Second, we made the action sequences legible by making use of slow motion edits and at the same time tried to make the sequences realistic. Third, we used diegetic music in the form of the daughter singing and slow ominous music towards the end, and in order to keep the audience's emotion at the same intensity as if there was overwhelming non-diegetic music, we included a twist in the narrative. With regard to the musical genre, we have shown that integrated musicals do not necessarily require a suspension of disbelief. We convey this in our short film by using backstage musical elements to make believe. The integrated musical component of the film, which consists of the father's action sequence, is explained by the backstage musical element where the daughter's performance helps to explain why there is singing and non-diegetic music during the action sequence. Moving on to the weaknesses of our project, the first is that my group feels that it would have been better if we could choreograph the fight sequences as a graceful performance which would better match the slow music and the daughter's voice. Second, we were also of the opinion that our action sequence is legible in the sense that it is in slow motion, but it is not complex enough and so it loses some element of style. I will now talk about the limitations that we faced during the project. The first is that of screen time. With the 1-minute extension for the film, we managed to fit in more details, but there were still some scenes that we deliberately chose to leave out for the lack of time. For instance, while planning the film, we intended to have the father fight off 2 henchmen and 1 villain before reaching his daughter, and we did film 2 such fight sequences, but due to time constraints, we were only able to fit in 1 sequence. We also intended to have a drone shot of the bar that the father was in during the first scene to establish that he's alone in a dilapidated place, as well as to serve as a transition between the bar and the Featurette scene, but we also chose to leave this out and instead made use of sounds to create the transition. The second limitation is manpower. Our ideal plan for the action sequence was to have 2 henchmen and 1 villain, but due to the lack of manpower, we decided to only have 1 henchman. But this lack of personnel proved to be a turning point for our project because it got us thinking that we could actually have this henchman represent the father's inner demon or alcoholism, which is by wearing the same shoes and same pants and by not showing the henchman's face throughout the entire film. We also made a decision not to show the villain shooting the daughter in the film and instead by having just a scene with the daughter falling after a gunshot sound. This leaves the film open to interpretation as to who killed the daughter, and this is something that we would have explored in detail and not left in abstract if not for the time constraints. With regard to the objectives of our project, we limited ourselves to exploring only the musical and action genre because we were of the opinion that these 2 genres were very compatible with each other and that it was possible to fit a musical action plot within 3 minutes. While within our group we did intend to make the fight sequences animated to introduce some versatility and complexity similar to the way that Kill Bill did it, we decided not to explore another genre given the limited time to produce this film, as animation would definitely have taken slightly longer than live action scenes to film and edit. Now moving on to the implications. Our group collectively feels that the greatest takeaway from this project is the process of making the film. The film allowed us to streamline our thought processes and identify what narratives and conventions were conceptually feasible for a 3-minute film, as well as what was practically feasible in terms of our resources. The film also helped us understand the conventions better because we were required to actualize the conventions in the film as opposed to conceptualizing, and this made us think thoroughly about what conventions we wanted to explore, what the conventions meant, and how to go about experimenting with them. While we faced limitations, we were able to work around them and come up with a better and more complex narrative. We hope we have helped you understand our film a bit better now, and thank you very much for your time.
Cut.
Okay, we're done. Okay, can?
Yeah.
Cannot.
No, I think it's okay. That's right.
Okay.